Welcome to John Gets Games. This is my variety vlog for February 2017, and as you can see, I'll be covering a bunch of different things, in particular, 10 different games of note, so this is going to be a bit longer than normal. Feel free to skip ahead to any of these sections that particularly interest you, or stick around for the whole thing. Let's start with a general update for the channel, and as always, briefly with Patreon, it was another solid month where there were 11 new patrons that were added on. I believe it was around $30 a month added to the overall campaign, which is just really great to see that continuing to roll. That's a pretty average month these days, which is a really cool thing to say. General update number 2 also has to do with money, but it is a really big subject that has me both excited and nervous. And in a nutshell, I have started to make sponsored content for this channel, as well as sponsored content not even for this channel. And right from the get-go, I will say that I will never take money to make reviews for this channel. That just does not ethically make sense. Instead, I have now started to make sponsored playthrough videos for games that publishers want to essentially market for. Like, it is marketing for them, and for me, I, in general, put out these playthroughs at a somewhat reasonable rate anyway, but they do take so much time, and so certain publishers have now decided that it's worth it to them to pay me some money to essentially bump them up to the top of the priority list and to make these videos. Astute observers may have noticed that there was a little tag disclaimer at the bottom of the Hanamikoji playthrough that I put out 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago, something like that, that said that it was paid sponsored content from Quick Simple Fun Games. And I have entered an agreement with them where I will be making playthroughs for many of the games that they have coming out over this next year, but not every single one, because not every game actually makes sense for a playthrough. You know, if it's like a hidden rolls deduction style game, it's very hard for one person to film that and make it appealing and interesting to watch. So I still am prioritizing making sure that the content I make is fun to watch, but it is a great new step to be paid to make some of this content. I will also be pretty much moving towards only paid playthroughs for Kickstarter campaigns. I do Kickstarter videos somewhat often, and I'm pretty strict about the ones that I do. In general, it's ones that I think are particularly interesting or that I think lots of people really want to see a playthrough for. And moving forward, I am mostly going to be doing paid content for that stuff. It just is a way to quell the number of Kickstarter videos that go out, and I think it's also a way to kind of vet and get the serious games that are well produced and have good Kickstarter campaigns going forward. It just makes sense to be paid money for the essentially marketing for that game to put it out there. So I am going to be doing a full playthrough for The Grim Forest coming out from Druid City Games. I don't have an agreement with them. This is just one video that I have coming out, but there is the possibility of me doing more of these going forward in the future. And lastly, I have started to make marketing material for Portal Games. These are videos that are not going to be posted on this channel at all. There is no John Gets Games logos or anything in these videos besides my face and my voice. And I am making essentially videos that show off briefly in like 3 to 4 minutes how the game plays and what the interesting aspects are and this kind of thing, and they're going to go over to Portal and they are going to post them up on their channel, and they're going to push those as just part of their marketing material. This is a very new thing for me. I've pretty much completed the first one, which is going to be for Kai Havoc, which, well, it's not completely done yet, but it's mostly there, and it's taken a lot of work. It's a very different type of video, making marketing style stuff as opposed to just playing a game or giving my opinion. But it is interesting learning how to grow and make different types of videos, and there's definitely something to be said for doing things that are difficult and scare you a bit to grow and learn and figure out if it's something that I want to keep doing. So at the end of the day, this means that John Gets Games is making more money, and it does not have any effect on the Patreon. I'm not going to be changing that at all. But I also did the math on Patreon. I charted out the average amount of support I get every month and how that applies to every year. And realistically, if I wanted to make John Gets Games even a solid part-time job that was maybe on equal footing to my regular job, I would need to wait about 6 or 7 years. The Patreon is doing really well, and I really appreciate all the support I've had there. It's a great way to supplement. It's a great way for people to show their appreciation for the stuff I do, but also it makes sense to make money specifically for the videos that I'm putting out that are interesting for people to watch, and also important for the publishers to just get their games out in front of the audience more. So I think I've rambled on about this a lot more than I wanted to. As I mentioned, I am excited and nervous about the overall reception that this is going to have, but it is a direction that I am starting to take John Gets Games, and I am interested to see how it's going to change and modify in the future. And finally, we have update number 3, which also has to do with money, but is more of a shout out. My good friends Efka and Elaine, who run the No Pun Included YouTube channel, are running a Kickstarter campaign right now, and I just want to give it a little bit more visibility because the campaign is doing well. It's funded for a half a year of videos, but they're not quite there to doing the full year, and they have stretch goals to go to Gen Con and all this kind of stuff. So I feel like if you have not looked at this Kickstarter campaign, and especially if you are not familiar with their YouTube channel, you should really check it out. They do amazing stuff. They're wonderful people. I really do feel like they are just great friends of mine. And of course, I do the Last Place podcast with Efka as well. So this is me abusing my powers to give them a little bit more attention. Check out their Kickstarter campaign. They do great stuff, and they would really appreciate your support. Next up, we have the segment where I ask for your opinion on something, and last month, I was curious about how you felt about my new microphone situation. I bought this new microphone, and the general feedback was very positive. I think only 1 or 2 people found some issues with it, and honestly, I'm still working out the kinks. I put out a playthrough for Plague Inc. last week, and the audio levels were still kind of up and down, and I would try to fix it in editing, but man, new technology and new gadgets definitely breed issues and new things to make mistakes on and need to fix. So I'm learning how to work those microphones better, but I'm really happy that people in general prefer this new microphone, so I am continuing to use it in all the videos for now. So let's move to the new topic for this month, and this is very much tied into the thing I already talked about a bunch. I am curious to know your opinion or how your opinion changes when you find out that content is sponsored by being paid money to make a specific video or something like that versus that video being made for free just because a person wanted to put it out there. This is very close to me right now because I am still making mostly non-paid videos, but I'm starting to make that paid content as I talked about in the general update section, and I just want to know how this makes you feel. Is it exciting when you see a channel kind of growing into this perspective, they're getting more serious, or is it more of a downer when you're like, oh, this is the beginning of the end, they're selling out and the stuff isn't going to be as good? Let me know what you think, and I'm very curious to see what you have to say. Let's now move into the question and answer section. And before I begin, if you have any questions you'd like me to answer, please shoot those over to johngetsgames@gmail.com and I will add those to the list. I will be covering 4 different questions right now, so let's jump right into it. The first one comes from Mike Chadwick, and he asks, what do you think about playing board games on the computer versus in person? Does the former ruin the purest experience, or is it a completely valid way to play that's just different? And I think that it is completely valid. It is definitely a different experience. Some board games are much easier to play online or on an iPad because the app itself can oftentimes do a bunch of the bookkeeping that you need. Also, if you're playing on like Tabletopia or Tabletop Simulator, there is no coding back there. So you actually need to move that cube over here and draw this number of cards and shuffle those over there. So it can be a little bit frustrating doing all of that with a mouse or a trackpad, but it's still a totally valid way to play games, and I've played lots of games this way because it's a wonderful way to play games with people I don't live close to. I've started to make friends with people all over the planet by getting into board games and specifically doing this channel, and I've had a ton of fun playing these games with lots of different people. For instance, I've played tons of games with my friend Efka. In fact, that's part of the reason we're such good friends. We've never actually met in person, but we've spent so much time chatting on Skype while playing these games that we've gotten pretty close, and it's wonderful to have that ability because he lives in England and I live in California. So I love the fact that we have this option to play these games online. Sure, it is a little fussy, and in general, I would always prefer to play it on the table in front of me, but I'm very glad it is an option in general. Question number 2 comes from Talal, and they ask, are your games organized in your home, or do you constantly have a mess because of all your gaming? And yes, my games are definitely organized behind me. In fact, what I've done is I have all of the lighter style games on this side of the shelf and all of the heavier style games over here. I also break that a little bit by having a 2-player section kind of over here, so it's easy to spot those. These small games kind of go up along the top, and then also the various heights of the games. In general, the higher up a game is, the more I'm interested in it, so the less I like a game, or if it's starting to wane a little bit and I want to try new stuff, a game might start to fall down, but that is by no means a standard. Like, there are definitely some good games that are low, and of course, when I have this 2-player section up here, it kind of messes things up. I put the games where I can fit them in the different sections, but in general, the best way to say it is I try to have the lighter stuff over here, the heavier stuff over there. It makes it easy for people when they come over to have some idea of where to look. If they want to start with something easy or end the night with something easy, they just look over there, and I think that is a way that works really well for me, and it's been modifying a little bit over time, but has been mostly this for the last 3 to 4 years, I'd say. Now we have question number 3, and this comes from Chad Arguello, and he asks, as your show has grown, you have stated how much time and energy you put into the channel. You obviously love board games, but does the channel seem to be like a job to you now? If it does it take away from your enjoyment of board gaming? And he went on to mention that he is thinking about making videos as well and wants to, and is worried about how it might affect board gaming in general. So I will say that, I've covered this a couple times, and I just talked a bunch about how I'm starting to do sponsored content. This is definitely starting to feel like a legit part-time sub job that I do when I can around the edges of my main job that I do. And I am happy to say that it has not tarnished my love for board gaming. If anything, it has really stoked those embers, those passions for gaming, because I have this great outlet to talk about them because I love to talk about games. I also am very cult of the new, so this is a great way to have better access to all the new stuff that's coming out. And it's just exciting to be part of this industry that I love so much. In fact, I'd love to get more into that industry. I'm just not exactly sure how. So for me, it has not been a problem. I've reviewed tons of different games, and I enjoy ending a game and asking my friends what they felt, and I kind of factor those things into how I feel, and really thinking about how this works and how that works, and coming up with subjective opinions about games. I actively enjoy doing that. I've kind of always done it. I just now have an outlet for it. So for me, it has not tarnished anything, but this is a very person-by-person type of thing. I know for some people, when they start to review games, it kind of kills the spark and fun they had, and they either keep doing it and start to enjoy this less, or they pull back and stop doing reviews and they get back to the core thing that they really enjoy. So it's not a bad thing for me, but I would say if this is something you are interested in trying, give it a shot. Do 2, 3, 5, something like that, and then see if your opinion has shifted in one way or another. For me, it got better, but for you, it might get worse. It's just going to depend on the person. And finally, we have question number 4, which is a bit of a follow-up because it also comes from Chad Arguello, and this one says, what are your long-term plans for the channel, i.e. a fully funded business or a hobby that just brings you some extra money? Well, I've been talking about money a lot in this particular variety vlog, and I will say that I am not sure what my long-term goals are for this channel. I'm not sure if I want to be full-time making YouTube videos and getting rid of my old job entirely. I like making videos, but it is a somewhat solitary experience, and I like doing things with people. So my current dream is to get a real job in the board gaming industry. I'm just not sure what that job is. So for the moment, this YouTube channel, I really enjoy doing it. I enjoy making all these videos, and it's really increasing the number of contacts I'm making and friendships I'm making. And I strongly feel like I am going to find my dream job and my dream goal, and I think that this channel is going to kind of unlock that ability. But I don't think I'm ever going to stop making these videos. I mean, of course, at some point I will, but for the long term right now, I see myself continuing to make videos. Like, even if I was in a situation where my main job changed drastically and I had much, much less time to make videos, I would at least go down to just making this variety vlog once a month or something like that. Like, I really enjoy making these videos, and for right now, I'm ramping into making a lot more of these. And my dream job might actually be in making videos, and it might be in doing John Gets Games full time in a couple years. I haven't figured that out yet. So I'm all ears and all eyes looking around, taking in all the data to see how I enjoy different parts of this. It really is kind of an adventure where I'm just kind of running out and seeing what I end up finding. And I think that it's awesome the number of connections that's making for me, and I'm very excited to figure out what my actual long-term goals are. But again, I could say that my short and medium run goals are to continue to really focus on this channel because it's just a lot of fun and I like making this content. And with that, I'm going to wrap up the question and answer section, and I'll get to the next ones in next month's vlog. Once again, if you have questions, shoot those over to johngetsgames@gmail.com. And let's go ahead and start talking about games. I've talked about the channel and in general games, but not specific ones. And the next segment is going to be games of note. And I have 10 different games to talk about. I played a ton of new games last month. If you're not familiar, in this section, I cover essentially my first impressions of a variety of games that I played over this last month. Usually, sometimes I'll actually cover a game that I played a long time in the past or one that was a particularly interesting play. But as normal, I have organized them from the one that I enjoyed the most down to the one I enjoyed the least. And I will say right off the bat that yes, there is a game on this list that I have been paid to make a playthrough for, but I was not paid for my opinion in the slightest. I'm still going to let you know what my first impression of it is, but when I actually get to that game, I will mention that I was paid to make a playthrough video for it. I'm going to try to stay as transparent with all the stuff so that you have the tools to understand my opinion as much as possible. So let's stop talking about that and move into the first game. And that is going to be the Vinhos, the special vintage edition. I played this online with my friend Efka. I have never played the original Vinhos, so this was designed by Vital Lacerda, and he's made other games like The Gallerist, Kanban, Panamax, Lisboa, lots of different games that in general have some similar stylings to them, but in general they are medium to heavyweight Euros that do a very good job of simulating the industry or the theme that they're really trying to get. They're not just cube pushers. You really do feel like you're doing what you're doing. So here we have Vinhos, which is about making wine in Portugal. And the original game came out a few years ago, and they just came out with a more streamlined version with a Kickstarter that happened last year, and that is this special vintage edition. So I cannot speak to the differences between the slightly heavier, less streamlined version. I can just talk to this one and say that I had a really good time with it, because what you're doing is you are manipulating around this surprisingly tight little system of essentially action selection, trying to make vineyards, make wineries, actually make wine, use this wine to sell it as exports or to sell it for just money so you can keep buying new vineyards, and then also trying to put these into fairs so that you can get a bunch of prestige, because at the end of the game, you are just trying to vie for the most victory points. But it has some really cool stuff going on here, because the main way that you do anything is you have this 3x3 grid where you have an action pawn, and you are moving it around this little grid to do the different actions, and you need to spend extra money if you want to move particularly far, and you need to spend extra money to your opponents if they are on the spots that you want to go to. So it has a worker placement vibe here, but you can still always go to where they're going. However, if you don't have money, you won't be able to do that, and money is surprisingly tight in this game. It's a neat little ecosystem where you are really trying to get the wine out and actually do good things with it while not stalling out and running out of money so that you can't build more vineyards, but then also making sure that your wine is really nice and fancy so that it wins awards at the festival so that you can get a lot of victory points. I was impressed with the game in general. I liked a lot of the decisions, and it's also relatively quick. It's hard to say from a timeline perspective because we actually had to split our play into 2 different days because I had to go to my regular job, but I think you take 13 actions over the course of the entire game, and I'll tell you right now, I didn't play this game terribly well. I actually won. I ended up having a pretty good score, I think, but I was not feeling like I was playing well. And I think at least 2 of those 13 actions were essentially wasted, where I did nothing with them. So you have this tiny finite number of actions you have in this entire game, and then some of them you can't even do something good with. But at the end of the day, in a typical Vital Lacerda fashion, I felt like I did a ton of stuff. You can get people who let you unlock special one-time actions, or I guess actions that can be refreshed a couple times, and so you can build these really nice combos, and the different types of grapes that you're using to make the wine have different special abilities. Some are just better at the fair, and other ones are just really good at squeezing you money out when you're trying to do other things. There's all sorts of different things going on. It's a game that feels simpler than it at first looks. So like when you first sit down to look at this game, you're like, whoa, this is going to be a heavy game. And then when you are taught the rules, you're like, whoa, that was a lot of rules. And then you start playing it and you're like, oh, okay, and make a vineyard. Okay, now the wine happens and now I spend it over here. I didn't find it simplistic. Like the decisions were definitely interesting and deep, but I was happily surprised that it was not overbearing when it came to the, in general, decision space, and I really enjoyed playing it. So I'm looking forward to playing this one more. This was just online. I don't have a copy, and I don't know anyone with a copy, but I'm sure I'll have more opportunities to give it a shot in the future. The next game I want to talk about is Kraftwagen, which came out a couple years ago, and I've been interested in trying it ever since I first heard about it, but not enough to go out and buy it until I ended up picking up a reasonably cheap copy at the Victory Point Cafe flea market about a month and a half ago. So anyway, I got to finally play it, and I really enjoyed it because what you're doing in this game is trying to build up old-timey cars and run some Grand Prix racing as you're essentially a car manufacturer in like the 1920s-ish, or around the time of the automotive revolution. And the central mechanic of this game is a circular track with a bunch of little action tokens on them. And the person who started is the one whose token is farthest back. And on your turn, you can just move forward as far as you want and evaluate the action that you land on. But of course, if you go really far, then you'll have to wait a long time before you can take another turn, as everybody else does all the stuff that you just skipped over. So this has been used in a couple different games, and specifically the same designer did Glenmore, and in that game you took the tile and did some tableau building, but in this one you just take that action and you skip it down to the very end of the line and then evaluate that action, and it might be building some engines, it might be building some car bodies, it might be actually figuring out who is on the market to buy specific cars and what kind of cars do they want. Do they want big engines? Do they want cheap cars? That sort of thing. And all at the same time, also, your company is doing some Grand Prix racing. And at the end of the day, you're just trying to get points. But it has some really great stuff here because one of the main actions that you do is research, which allows you to increase your technology for building engines, for building the car bodies. And then also you can recruit these famous engineers who will let you do quite powerful abilities. Some of them are a finite number of times, and other times just an ongoing effect that can really kind of break the game in some certain ways. And I really loved this aspect to it because it does feel like some engine building as you are building engines. But this also did hit on really the only problem that jumped out at me after one play, and that was the luck of the draw in the research stack, but specifically, I'm okay. So the way it works is there are always two different cards you can pull. And once you take one of them, the other one is discarded, and then you pull two more out for the next person who gets to research. The problem is that some of the cards in that deck are just bad. They're just worse than everything else. And so when you get randomly two bad cards, that is not good. And one of the players seemed to be consistently being given these options of these very bad cards, and they did not do very well, and they did not have a great time with the game. They liked everything else that was going on, but their in general mood was stifled because they kept feeling like they were getting bum luck. And so what I've decided, even after playing just one play, the next time I play it, I'm going to pull out all of those bad cards. They're essentially the engine and car body upgrades that just give you one upgrade and don't even give you a bonus action. I'm just going to pull those out of the deck. And because after that point, I think there are going to be a lot less bad cards, and in general, I think the cards will be much more balanced. So even though there is some luck of the draw and variance for how the different research things come out, you are less likely to get just straight up terrible options. They might not be the options you want, but they won't be just empirically worse than the person who did it last. So I am looking forward to playing this game again. I think everybody around the table enjoyed it. I thought I was running away with this one. I was building the coolest looking cars, and I was getting them sold for crazy amounts of money, but I ended up losing by just a couple points to my friend Matt, who kind of went the opposite route, made incredibly cheap cars, but had a couple engineers that modified it so they actually got to sell it for 3 times their money instead of 2 times their money. And he did a couple quick things where he could modify his cars on the fly even after he'd sold those cars. There was all sorts of shenanigans that he was pulling, and I was bummed that I didn't win, but it was also cool to see him win because even though I felt like I was doing some cool stuff, I think he was doing much more cool stuff. So it kind of made sense that he won. That's Kraftwagen. I really enjoyed playing it. I guess as a side note, this was the V6 edition, which is a slight little kind of mini expansion that puts these specialty tiles on the action track based on the different era of the game you're in. And I liked it. I don't see myself not playing with the V6 edition, although I don't think that made or broke the game. I think it's going to be totally fine without that expansion. It's just a neat little bit of variety that's sprinkled on there. The third game on the list is Star Trek Panic, and I'll just say right from the get-go that I am surprised that it is this high up on the list, because I played Castle Panic years ago when it first came out, and I was not that enthusiastic about it. So if you're not familiar with either of these games, the original game was called Castle Panic, and you had this little castle in the middle of some concentric rings on a board, and all these kind of fantastical enemies march towards you, and they try to break down your castle, and everybody's trying to cooperatively kill all these enemies off. It was a pretty simplistic co-op. It had a weird semi-co-op thing where one person could win if they were more effective than the others. It just didn't quite, I mean, it worked, but it was not very interesting. It was like, eating a bowl of rice. Like, sure, I'd eat another bowl of rice, but I'm not particularly interested in going out of my way to do that. So along comes Star Trek Panic, and this is not the first new version of the Panic system, but this one puts you in the atmosphere of the original Star Trek series with like Captain Kirk and Spock and Uhura and all of them. And I'll say from the get-go that I enjoy Star Trek, but I am not a Star Trek aficionado in the slightest. So I'm familiar with all of these people's names, but that's pretty much where it ended. And I heard that there were some pretty neat things going on in this game, and it was sent to me as a review copy from USAopoly, and I finally got to play it, and I had a really good time. And I think that's because instead of just being a bowl of rice, it's now a bowl of rice with a bunch of yummy stuff mixed in and a bunch of good sauces, and you mix it up and it's spicy, and we all had fun. In fact, this game got played twice in the same day, mostly because other people saw how much fun the first group was having and they wanted to play it again as well. I played it in both of those games, and let's talk about the actual gameplay for this one. So the big difference here is instead of having a castle in the middle of the board, you now have the Star Trek Enterprise. And instead of just having all the monsters kind of march towards you, you now have all of these enemy ships that kind of appear in all of these different sectors, and you can move towards them. You can actually steer the Enterprise around and move towards these enemies. But also, unlike the original game, all of the enemies are ranged, so they're all shooting you while moving closer to you and continuing to shoot you until they end up ramming you and boarding you and doing damage, as opposed to the original game where some of the things were ranged and some of them just kind of walked up and they did a bunch of damage when they got close. But the real big difference between these two games is the mission structure. In Castle Panic, the way you won was just waiting out to get through the entire bag of monster chits. Once you go through the whole bag and you kill all the monsters, you win. But in Star Trek Panic, you just keep going through that bag indefinitely until you have satisfied 5 different missions, which really added a great amount of variety to the gameplay because it wasn't just about, oh, kill everything on the map. It sometimes put special markers on the map that behaved in odd ways that would be there kind of messing you up until a specific condition was met. Sometimes that involves just discarding certain numbers of cards from your hands. Other times it involves killing things off in a certain waves. We had one event happen where it just said, don't kill any Klingons, survive for 5 rounds. And it got really crazy in that one. I think there was something else going on there as well, but we weren't able to do anything to the Klingons, and it was an interesting experience. And I will say that I enjoyed both of the games. In the first game, I was a little worried. It was almost a little easy, and the original Castle Panic was easy as well, so I was kind of worried about that. It wasn't super easy. We ended the game with no damage to the Enterprise, but we had no shields. But in that second game, we went down in flames, like literally, because the component quality of this game is pretty exceptional. You have this large cardboard Enterprise that's in the middle of the table, and you have these awesome plastic blue shield tokens that you put down, and as the Enterprise itself starts taking damage because the shields have been taken down, you kind of slot these damage tokens on, and then once it gets really damaged or destroyed, you overlay this piece that is specific to that 1/6 of the Star Trek Enterprise, and it shows like flame gouting and pieces falling off, and it was really cool to see us lose in a fiery ball. And so I enjoyed both plays. It was fun even when we were losing. There were a couple really close moments where we could have almost pulled off a win in that second game, but the fact that we lost and still had a great time says a lot about the game. I was not expecting to like this one much at all. I thought it would be maybe a little bit better than Castle Panic, and I went away from it really enjoying the experience, and I'm looking forward to playing this one again. Next up, we have nimmt, which is a new version of an older classic, which is called nimmt, which came out, I believe, over 20 years ago. And before I talk about the X, let's talk about the 6. The way that the original nimmt played was everybody had a hand of 10 cards at the beginning of the round. They had numbers on them going from 1 to 104. They're shuffled up, given out to all the players, and everybody simultaneously picks one card, puts it face down, and then they all reveal and then ascendingly put these cards into these 5 different rows in the middle of the table. And if you ever put the 6th card into a row, well, then you take all of the cards that were in that row. The cards have little victory points on them, but you don't want points in this game. And you do that 10 times, and you keep going until a certain person gets to a certain victory point threshold, and whoever has the least points wins. So it's a neat game. I've played it a bunch, especially many years ago in my old gaming group, so I was quite interested to try this new version, which is called nimmt. Jessica, my wife, really loves nimmt, so I actually got this for her for Christmas because I knew she loved nimmt so much, and we got to play it a couple times. The biggest first restriction is that nimmt plays up to 10 players, and nimmt plays up to 4. So it's a lot less flexible when it comes to player count, which was one of the original big benefits to nimmt. It's like you got a bunch of people, play nimmt. But what's going on in nimmt is you now have 3 rows in the middle of the table. One has a 3, one has a 4, and one has a 5. And those are the values at which you actually take the row. So it's not just always the 6th card, it's the 3rd card in the 3rd row, in the 3 row, and the 5th card in the 5 row. And that's not the only way that this game is different, because once you actually put that X card down, whether it's a 3, 4, or 5, you pull up the cards, but they don't immediately go into a negative score pile. Instead, you pull one of those 5 cards, or one of those X number of cards, and you put them down in front of you into your own X line, which is a row that only you are working on, and the rest of the cards go back into your hand so you can keep playing them out. So in nimmt, you always just played until everybody played all their cards. It was always 10 cards around. But here in nimmt, the round has a variable number of turns because you keep playing until one person runs out of all of their cards, but of course you get new cards every time you essentially kind of bust and pull these cards up as points. So now let's look at that X row that you have in front of you. You are ascending with this row as well, and when the round ends, you lose no points for any of the cards in that row. But if you ever take a set of cards whereby you have to put a card down that is not ascending, then all the cards in your X row go into a negative score pile, and they are worth double negative points. So when the round is over, you have those double negative points for when you had to bust your own X line. You have regular style negative points for all the cards left over in your hand, and then you get no penalty for the cards that are currently in the X row. And this gives so many more interesting decisions to this game, because it's not just about trying to work your way around to take the least amount of cards. In general, you probably are going to have to take some cards, and you can take cards and still go out first, potentially, because most people are going to be taking cards. And then also strategically working on which set of cards you take so that you can put the right card down into your X row in front of you so that you don't take double negative points. I found myself playing cards specifically to bust on a row so that I get some like low-level cards so that I can then play them into other rows, because at that moment my hand was looking terrible for the. So strategically working on which set of cards you take so that you can put the right card down into your X row in front of you so that you don't take double negative points. I found myself playing cards specifically to bust on a row so that I get some like low-level cards so that I can then play them into other rows, because at that moment my hand was looking terrible for the way the current setup was on the board. Or I guess in general, if I had two lower cards, I was going for really high cards to be able to play them up above different things. And I loved the way it unlocked these extra decisions, like sometimes intentionally taking roads to get better cards into your hand and all this stuff going on. In this game, you just play 2 rounds and see who has the least number of points. We played it twice, and I really enjoyed it. I am looking forward to playing this one more. Really, the only issue I see after these 2 plays is that it only plays up to 4 people. And I think the biggest reason for that is with more people, it has more chaos and a higher likelihood of the round going forever. So I think it'd be relatively easy to house rule this one because you don't use anywhere near all of that deck to have 5 or 6 players, where instead of the 3, 4, and 5 rows, you could make a 4, 5, and 6 row, so there's a little bit less variance there, maybe with a 5 player. And if you're playing with 6 players, maybe you do that, and then you only play 1 round, so it might be a while until one person goes out, but once that happens, the game is over and you count up your points. I don't know, I think it's worth trying. If I'm in a situation where I have 5 or 6 people who really want to try it, I think I'll probably experiment around. It's a really neat additional game latched onto the old game of 6 nimmt. It feels like it's a kind of a gamer's style version of 6 nimmt, and I'm really excited to play it more. Now we have the 5th game I'll be talking about, and that is The Blood of an Englishman. This is a 2-player only asymmetric card style game where one person plays Jack, who is trying to climb up the beanstalk and steal these treasures, and the other person plays the giant, who is trying to essentially thwart Jack. And it is a really neat style game. It's designed by this Dan Kassar, who did Arboretum and Caveman Quest for Fire, which I actually own. So I have 3 of his games up here. I think those are the only 3 games he's ever designed. But either way, what's going on in Blood of an Englishman is each player plays significantly different rules while actually manipulating a communal set of cards in the middle of the table. You have a bunch of these different rows. I can't remember exactly if it's 5 or 6, something like that, or I guess they're columns of stacked cards. And the Jack player is trying to pull out these vine cards in ascending order to get enough of them. I believe it is 6 out of the 9 total. Once he gets up to 6 in ascending order, but not necessarily in sequential order, he can steal one of the 3 treasures and then start a new beanstalk, going from low to high, trying to get all 3 of these and steal all 3 of the treasures. And he's doing this by activating on his turn the ability to swap cards around from one row to another, and he can grab cards from the front of rows and from the back of rows to put down into his beanstalks. But every time the Jack player finishes their turn, it goes over to the Giant player, who only takes one big action as opposed to the multiple actions that the Jack player does. And the Giant's actions can like grab 4 cards from one column and move them to another column. They can also just straight up destroy cards. They pull any card from anywhere on the board and they just pull it out of the game and it is gone. And this is the main way that the Giant player can put a clock on the Jack player, because they are constantly trying to pull these cards out to make it impossible for the Jack player to keep building these ascending rows of vines to get all this treasure. But the Giant wins in one other way, and that is if they are able to get the words fee, fi, fo, and fum all on the bottom of the columns or together in one of these specific columns. And they don't have to be in order, but they have to be kind of adjacent in the column or spread out along the bottom. And thematically, that's just fun. You know, the Giant wins because they say fee, fi, fo, fum. I spelled The Blood of an Englishman, which is the name of the game, and that is one way that the Giant wins. So I played this game twice in a row with my friend Claire. The first time I played as the Giant, the second time I played as Jack. And I won both of the games, although the first game kind of accidentally, because neither of us knew what we were doing. So there was one particular play where things went a little bit awry, and I ended up winning that one, kind of surprising both of us. And the second play went a little bit longer, and it got really close near the end. And it is a really neat game. There's a surprising amount of thinkiness going along with that very small set of rules. Each of these plays probably took about 20 to 30 minutes, but it was 20 to 30 minutes of constant thinking. which kind of reminds me of Arboretum, which is another beautiful game with a simple rule set, but just a almost brain-burning atmosphere where you just have so much stuff to think about. And this one, you're trying to manipulate these cards around, but everything is public, so your opponent sees everything that you're doing. For the Jack player, you're trying to figure out how to pull these things out and get a number of actions, and constantly trying to juggle the fact that you see these fee-fi foam cards kind of getting closer, and you see what the giant's trying to do, and you're trying to thwart it while still doing your stuff. Whew, there's a lot going on here for just a set of cards splayed out on the table, and we both enjoy the game quite a bit. We both enjoyed the brain burnness of it quite a bit, and I'm looking forward to trying this one more as, I guess not really a super filler because it's still relatively short playing, but it's definitely a meaty filler style game, a very cool two-player asymmetric experience for sure. All right, we've now reached game number 6, which means we are halfway through this list, and this game is Capital Lux. I was able to play my friend Annette's copy. She's on Twitter as Netters, and she also does board game reviews on YouTube, which is pretty cool. Anyway, she taught me this game at the Euro Gaming League meetup in San Francisco, and it is, I guess, kind of similar to Blood of an Englishman in that it is a card game with simple rules, but quite a few things to think about with some neat tension going on. Because what you're doing in this game is everybody gets a hand of cards, and you are either playing them in front of you to get no abilities, or you play it into the center to activate an ability that is specific to the color of the card that you put down there. And the round goes until one person loses all of their cards, and at that moment, everybody else has to put all of their cards in their hand down in front of them in their personal tableau, and then you add up the values of these cards. So if I had like a 3, a 4, and a 5 in yellow in front of me, that would be, oh, quick math, 12, right? In the yellow, and if you look out to the middle of the table, and if there is less than 12 value of cards there, then you lose all of those cards. And so you're constantly balancing, trying to keep the cards in front of you under the total number of value on the cards in the middle of the table, because if they are under, then you could score one of those cards to just get straight up victory points at the end of that round, and then you end up doing, I think it was 3 overall rounds to the game. And the abilities that you can activate when you put the cards in the middle let you steal cards back and put them in front of you, as well as get these gold coins, which are actually squares, that allow you to maybe fudge the numbers so that you can keep a set of cards in front of you that maybe you shouldn't have been able to, or just get victory points. There's a lot of little things that you can do here and quite a bit of cool things to think about. I only played it once and I enjoyed it, but I did find that there was a wonderful amount of tension in the first round of the game. In the second round of the game, there was some tension, and the third round of the game did not feel like it was very tense. It seemed like the areas in the middle of the table were so well stocked that everybody just kind of played the biggest cards they could to score the most points they could. And I think part of that is because we had a ton of these pink cards in the very first round of the game, and actually you do a draft, hand draft of 2 cards and pass between each of these rounds, and I think like close to 50% of the cards in that first round were pink. And because of that, the pink action lets you put it down into the middle and then pull another card out in front of you. And that meant that after the first round, pink was just gigantic, and there's no way to pull pink cards out of that pink section. So for the rest of the game, specifically with pink, you just tried to draft the biggest pink cards you could. It didn't matter how many pink cards you put down because the pink column in the middle of the table was just gigantic. And Annette mentioned that she had played this game like 12 times or 10 times and had never seen this particular thing happen. So maybe it was just a quirk of that one specific play. I'm interested in trying it more because I see a really cool game in here, and I cannot draw any parallels to the loss of tension between one game to the next because I've only played it once. So I'm looking forward to trying this one again. I guess the last thing to mention, and you can see in the images I'm putting up, it is a gorgeous game. I just love the art style in this one. It definitely hits for me. I don't think it's for everyone, but I really enjoyed just looking at the cards that were in front of me. So yeah, cool, beautiful looking game. Guards of Atlantis is the 7th game I'll be talking about here, and I was able to play this twice over the last month. And this is a MOBA style board game, and I am not particularly familiar with MOBA in general. I know that it is a style of video games where everybody has a hero that they're running around on a map, and there are a bunch of non-player character units that spawn and kind of attack each other, and you win by pushing your opponents all the way back to their base. And that is the theme that you have going on here with Guards of Atlantis. I think technically it plays 2 to like 11 players or something crazy like that, but both the games I played were 4 players, and it's team-based. So you split up into 2 and 2. Each person takes on the role of one of the heroes, and the game comes with a bunch, I think technically 11 heroes, although 2 of the heroes are kind of combined into 1 hero. I won't go into the details of that there, but that is a bunch of different hero options because they're all unique. They have their own specialized deck of starting cards and then also upgrade cards, because what you're doing as you're playing this style of game, I think in the video games and here in Guards of Atlantis, is as you kill things, you kind of get money, and you could spend money to upgrade yourself and get better actions so you could do cooler, big stuff out in the battlefield. And what you're doing in the game is trying to kill your opponents' figurines out on the field, as well as kill off the non-player the figurines that are out on the board. And there are some neat ideas here that are trying to get around the video game to board game issue. Like, the first thing is, in the video game, all the minions march and they have their own little paths and they do various things. And in a board game, that could be potentially kind of time consuming and annoying, having to move your minions around. So instead, in this game, the minions don't move. They just spawn on specific spots, and they give buffs to all of the friendly heroes around them, and they give negative buffs, debuffs to the opponents that are next to them. And they all die very quickly, except for the brutes, or the really big ones that need to be the last thing killed off in an area. But everything in this game has 1 hit point, including the heroes, which is where the tension really comes down to when you're playing this game, because the way you evaluate a round is you will do 4 actions, and then you will reset the board and see where things are and maybe push towards an opponent's area. And you only have 5 cards, and you will only ever have 5 cards. So you will be playing 4 out of these 5 cards in a given round, and you do this simultaneously. Everybody picks a card, puts it down, you flip them over, and then you go in initiative order. In this game, you start with the biggest numbers, then you go all the way down, and those people just activate and do various things. But whenever you attack an opponent, they have to discard a card to defend against it. If they don't discard a card, then they just die, because again, everything in this game has 1 hit point. Even if you are leveled up all the way to 8 and you have your ultimate ability and you're just super crazy powerful, you still die if 1 attack gets through. And when you, what you do is you discard a card from your hand, and all the cards except for 1, a hold card, all the cards have a little shield value on them, and you check that shield value against the strength of the attack, and if it meets it or exceeds it, then you survive, and if it doesn't, then you die. And this means that you have 1 less card in your hand, so you can do potentially less actions. So if you get attacked once, well, now you have 4 cards to your 4 actions. If you get attacked again, now you have 3 cards to your 4 actions, and it means you're not actually going to do 4 actions in that round, which is also a cool way that the game shows off getting tired and getting exhausted. If you get kind of double teamed by your opponents, they can really kind of kill you off, forcing you to discard these cards. And on that 4th turn, you have no cards in your hand. It means any attack that they can get down is going to kill you because you have nothing to discard. And so that's kind of how the game plays. And now let's talk about the 2 plays that I had. The first one was a bit weird. One of my opponents in the game died in the very first round, and we proceeded to just kind of steamroll them. Like myself and my friend Matt, we just kind of, one of them died, and when you die, you're out for at least 2 rounds, sometimes up to 6 rounds, is kind of simulating a timer that's in the video games until you can respawn on the map. So here you are out for several rounds, where it's just going to be 1 person versus 2 in the 4-player setting. And we just kind of kept pushing, and the game was over in like 3 rounds. And we all kind of sat there and were like, that was weird. That wasn't particularly tense, and it wasn't a great play, that's for sure. And I wanted to try it again to see what was going on here. And so I was able to play another 4-player game of it. And this game actually went so long that we called it early as a draw, because, well, the main endgame condition of the game is just push until you get to opponent's base. So in the first one, we just kind of steamrolled them and got all the way to the end and won really quickly. In the next one, we just kind of pushed back and forth and back and forth. And the game actually comes with a variant, a tower variant, where you play until a certain number of pushes happen, where you move forward, and then whoever gets the most of them, gets that push threshold, just wins the game. And it looks like that's probably the best way to play the game, and that's kind of where we called it. It was a draw, but if we'd been using the push variant after that 2 hours, we would have just barely able to squeak out a victory. But everybody really enjoyed that play of it, because we really felt like we saw the ebb and flow of the game. We saw how you need to really capitalize on your opponent's mistakes. We saw how even really powerful opponents, heroes, can be taken down. For instance, I was this kind of barbarian character who was ludicrously powerful. My attacks were really powerful. I could charge ahead and smack people. Normally you can't move an attack, but I could move an attack. And then my defense was through the roof. Like, no attack could get through to me. But when my opponents were able to kill off my partner, he was out of the round, and they started focusing on me. I just started running away, and I couldn't run away fast enough. They landed too many attacks, and they ended up killing me, even though one of them was level like 4 and I was level 8. because I just ran out of cards. And that was a neat way to simulate the overall situation while we were playing the game. So my initial impression of the game is it's a little weird. You have to be okay with the fact that you can get pulled off the board and not come back in for a set number of turns. And it can be quite swingy in good ways. Like if a level 3 person manages to kill that level 8 person, well, they get 2 times the level of the opponent's level in gold. So they get 16 money. And in order to level from 2 to 3, it's 3 gold. And from 3 to 4, it's 4 gold. So if you are a low level person and you kill a high level opponent, you could just instantly level up like 3 times and catch back up into the game. So I saw all these things in the second play. I definitely see what a lot of people enjoy in this game. It's not really my style of game, dudes on a map running around, smacking each other, trying to get to this end game objective. But I could see myself giving it another try, but it's certainly not for everybody. A couple of the people who played it in that first game were just like, yeah, I never want to play this game again. For certain people, specifically people who are focused on Euro games, this is not going to necessarily appeal, but that's not surprising because there are no victory points here. You're just running around smacking each other with swords and casting weapons and spells and all that kind of stuff. So that is Guards of Atlantis. It's a bit polarizing, but it's got some really neat ideas to translate from the video game space over to the board game space. At game number 8, we have Hanamikoji, although if I'm being honest, games 6, 7, and 8 are all pretty much tied for overall enjoyment. I enjoyed this one more than it seems like I did down at number 8. And I guess the other thing to mention is I did do a paid playthrough for this game, although this is my honest opinion of the one play that I've had of it, in addition to the actual playthrough that I did. And this is a 2-player only filler game that will usually take less than 15 minutes to play. I can imagine if 2 people really know what they're doing, they could get a game of this done in about 7 minutes. But there is a lot of stuff to think about here because on a simple level, there are these 7 geishas in the middle of the table, and you are trying to end a round having control or, I guess, influence over 4 of them. You are putting down the various artistic instruments and that kind of thing that they need to do their art, like if they're a musician or a painter, that kind of thing. But you don't just put these cards down. You activate these 4 specific actions in front of you. You can do them in any order, but you cannot do them twice. So the round will end once both players have done the same exact 4 actions. And pretty much everything you're trying to do has to go through your opponent first. Like there is a card where you take 4 cards from your hand, you put them into 2 piles of 2, and you present them to your opponent. They pick one of them and put them down on their side, and then you get the other. Another one is you pull 3 cards out, your opponent picks one of those cards, puts it on their side, and you put the other 2 down. The third action is you can put a secret card face down, and at the end of the round you reveal it, so it's a bit of a surprise to your opponent. And the last one is just take 2 cards and essentially discard them, so they won't be in this one round of the game. And that's it. That's the whole game. And you, at the end of the round, you see who has a majority of cards on their side for the geishas. If you have 4 of them, then you win. Or if you have 11 charm value worth of geishas, you win. Because the values of the geishas go from 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 5. So you can actually win if you control the 5, 4, and the 3, because that gets you up to 11. And you actually win in that case if the other person has control of 4. But either way, this is a thinky game for such a tiny little space of time, because everything you're doing has to go through your opponents. You're like, is this the turn where I pull these 3 cards and then they choose one of them? But if I do this, then which one are they going to pick? And what are they going to do? And then they do those cards and they have the 3 in front of you. And which one do you pick? Because you see the cards you have in your hand and the cards that they have in front of them, and they've already buried a card and you're not sure what that is. And if you end a round and neither person gets to an end game condition, then you shuffle up and do another round of it, in which case you already have control of some of the geishas and not on the other ones. There was a lot of stuff to think about in this incredibly tiny little time frame of a game. So I found myself satisfied and pleased with the overall game experience. I mean, it is very short, which is part of the reason why it's not like super high up on the list. Like I enjoyed it, but also it was almost too brain burning. Like I enjoyed the decisions I was making, but it got to a certain point where I was like, if this, then that, then this, and that. But if they, then me, then me, and they think I'm going to do this, and they think I'm going to do this, and I'll do that, and blah, 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 and your brain just kind of like, I'm just going to do this. And I was able to win the game I played against a real life opponent, which was pretty cool to do. It went to 2 rounds, and it was really close and really tight there at the end. I think this is a pretty cool little gaming experience for 2 players to fill in the cracks in a game night, or even just play while you're traveling or something like that, maybe multiple times. Although, again, I will admit, it takes a surprising number of your brain cells to work your way through this incredibly quick little game. And for some people, that'll be a big plus, and for other people, it might actually be too heavy for what they're looking for in a filler. At game number 9, we have the very oddly spelled Ciub. This came out a couple of years ago to no fanfare at all. I was able to pick this up at the flea market at the same time I grabbed Kraftwagen, and I got to play a 2-player game with Jessica. Actually, we played 2 games back to back. But this does not necessarily mean that we enjoyed it. Obviously, it's very far down on the list because what's going on in this game is you are developing a pool of different colored dice. The dice are not standard D6s. They have various abilities on them and different numbers. And you are trying to roll these dice and re-roll them, locking a die every single time, but you can keep rolling kind of as long as you want to until you run out of dice to lock. And then you try to match a combination with these point scoring cards in the middle of the table. And every time you do you grab one of these point scoring cards, you have to kind of dump your dice engine back down to 5 dice. And you are constantly just honing and modifying this dice pool, which sounded really cool to me. Like, I love dice pool management games. Rolling a bunch of dice, that seems very cool. So that's one of the reasons I went out to grab this game. But unfortunately, it just kind of felt like a repetitive slog for the 2 of us, especially considering you can kind of acquire the new dice not relatively easily, but just the dice flowed in and out so quickly. There was not a feeling of scaling, and it seemed like, not that there was a runaway leader or anything like that, but luck could definitely favor one person more than another, and you can mitigate this by taking specific dice. Like if you need a 2, 4, and a 6, well, you take the die that only has even numbers on it, for instance, and that has a reroll or that kind of thing going on. So there are definitely things to think about, but after playing it 2 times in a row, kind of back to back, the second time really just to kind of work our head around what our actual thoughts of it were. We like finished the first game, we're like, that was weird. I'm not sure if I liked it, but it's already out. Let's try it one more time. I don't think we'll actually be playing this one again after that. Like, our opinion of it is, that was neat, that was okay, it's kind of pretty, but it missed a mark as far as being tense and interesting. And I also don't think it would be great with more than 2 players because there's just nothing you do when it's not your turn, so downtime could potentially be a problem as people are rolling dice and re-rolling dice and swapping dice out and rolling more dice and thinking about it. So yeah, not exactly an endorsement from me. It was an okay first play, but I'll be getting rid of this one at the board game auction that's coming up soon, and it's just not going to get played again by us. And finally, at game number 10, we have Isle of Monsters. This was sent to me as a review copy, and it has the most adorable art, which is one of the big reasons that I read the rules and I got it out and we sat down and played it. Because it just has these really cute little monsters that you are kind of building and training and then trying to scare your opponents with. They go through all these various phases of life. So you have like baby monsters and then big grown-up monsters with this wonderful cartoony style. And when I read the rules, I was like, there could be a cool game in here, because what you're doing is you kind of go through multiple phases of the game. The first main phase of the game is you grab these monsters from these kind of shared piles between you and your opponents, and you put them into a little cage, and then you need to feed them specific colored food, and there is food that is spread around on the board, and the ones that are between you and your rightmost opponent, well, only you and your rightmost opponent can grab, and then same with the food that is spread out between you and your left opponent. And there is also food in the middle of the table that all the players can go to, so you're trying to, grab the right food so that you can completely fill up one of these monsters, because once they're full, they go into your scare deck, and then once everybody finishes their feeding phase, you all will simultaneously pull out certain numbers of these monsters, and you display them, and whoever has the highest overall value monsters is going to get some scare points. And then there's a bit of a rock, paper, scissors thing going on, where if I play a fire monster, then it is going to scare a water monster that is next to me on either of my sides, so I could get points for that. But if I put fire scares the earth monster. If my opponent played a water monster, then obviously the water is going to scare the fire, because water puts out fire. And then my opponent is going to get some points. And you just keep doing this until you run out of monster cards. And it was okay, I guess. Like, it sort of worked. The endgame scores were pretty close. I ended up pulling off a win, which surprised me, even though I didn't have any huge monsters like some of my opponents did. But most of the decisions felt pretty straightforward, like an obvious decision set. When you're trying to take the food, you just look around and you're like, well, I need blue, and there's only one blue there, so I'm going to take that. Or the blue's there and there, my opponent needs a blue over there, so I'm going to take the one that's next to them so they don't get it. And then it's okay that there's a blue over here, I'll get that later because this opponent doesn't care about blue, for instance. But also, when you're trying to train these monsters, like, I ended the game with, I think, almost all fire monsters, because those are the only ones that were available to me. That's just the way they kind of were dealt out. So I didn't have lots of decision of, do I put a fire monster out now, or do I put a water monster out? What are my opponents going to do? I didn't really care what my opponents were going to do in this instance. I didn't have the brain space to memorize the monsters that they had trained. So in the end, it's a system that worked. It was not particularly compelling. It went a little longer than we wanted, and even at that, it was like an hour and 10 minutes. There wasn't enough there to satisfy an hour and 10 minutes. It's maybe good with younger people. I can't really speak to experience with that. I will say that they're going to love the art. The art is wonderful. I personally like the art. I just wish there was a more interesting game wrapped around it for me and my friends, so I don't see us visiting this one again. All right, let's now move into the shifting shelf. Let's talk about more games. These are the ones that are entering my collection, or at least entered my collection this month, and then also the games that are leaving my collection this month because you have to make room for it. With the ones that entered, we have Hanamikoji, obviously, to do that playthrough. We got Isle of Monsters, which I just talked about. Saint Rini, I got a free review copy of that, mostly because I did the full playthrough of that one last year for the Kickstarter for that game. There's Nerdy Inventions, which is also a review copy, and then finally Quest of Valeria. And then the games that I had to pull off the shelf, well, the first one is Loon Architects, which is a bit of a shame because I only ever played it solo against myself. And this is essentially Glenmore on the moon with hexes instead of squares. So you are moving your little tokens around, kind of like Kraftwagen, which I talked about as well, where the person whose turn it is the one who's farthest back. You move forward, grabbing tiles, you put them in front of you to try and build your moon base and convert stuff into points and have the most points at the end of the game. But my solo play was not particularly interesting, and because of that, I never was interested in actually getting it to the table with any of my friends. And it's been a couple months now. There's just so many other games I'd rather play, so I decided to pull that one off. I'm going to sell that one, and hopefully to somebody who is going to enjoy it and be more interested in it than I have been. Ciúb and Isle of Monsters, I just talked about in the games notes section why those games didn't really do it for me. So Isle of Monsters came and is also leaving the shelf within this 1 month. And then finally we have Assassin Con, which was a review copy that I never actually got a play of because it is a game of hidden roles where you're all assassins at a convention for assassins trying to kill each other. There are some really convoluted rules I didn't quite understand. We tried to sit down and figure it out with some of my friends, and we all kind of decided that it's not something we were really interested in pushing through to actually play. So once again, hopefully this one will go on to somebody who is actually interested in giving this one a shot because it just did not meet the excitement threshold to even hit the table once for us, unfortunately. And with that, we finally reached the wrap-up. This has been a long vlog. I'm not sure what the actual total is going to end up being, but I feel like I've talked about a lot more games than normal, a lot more questions than normal, and a lot more updates, or longer updates than normal. This is a pretty significant month for John Gets Games. A lot of stuff going on with the changing the structure where I'm going to get paid to get some of these videos out, as well as just a ton of these different games that I got played. Means that my voice is a little bit hoarse. So with this, we're going to end the vlog so I can go drink some water and rest it. I'd like to thank everyone, as always, who has been supporting this channel through Patreon, including all of these producer level pledges. If you too would like to help directly support everything that I do here, you could do so at patreon.com, and I'd really appreciate it. Also, if you'd like to see more of these vlogs that I do once a month, as well as in-depth board game reviews and full game playthroughs, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.